very much from me, and over to Graeme.
Kia ora. Thank you, Nick, for that. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Graeme Ball, taka wingama. If my voice is a little bit croaky, it's because I've managed to get COVID just in the last few days. So it's not too bad, but that has been one of the effects, a very sort of croaky voice. So I will start now the slideshow. So I'm just going to share that. That's it. And I think, how do I hide that? So it gets in the way. Hide. Meeting, there we go. So what you can see here are the titles that Nick was talking about, and some of them go back quite early, actually, with my first involvement with, I think it was Newhouse Thompson then. The ones at the bottom, that was the early 2000s, and then I've created or written and Cengage has published another two main texts. So Expanding World, New Country, the most recent, Big World, Small Country. You'll see the theme there for the names. And then also two history skills books. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of these, referring both to the utility for secondary schools, but also for teachers anywhere of the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, because I think one of the advantages of a textbook, and if you feel it's got that merit once I've gone through this, I think one of the real advantages is that it contains everything in one place. There is a large amount of information out there, good information out there, but funnily enough, that makes it quite difficult when you're trying to sort through it all and decide what you want to use, especially if you don't have a lot of background in New Zealand history. So I think these two textbooks on the left-hand side of the screen could be quite useful for teachers of the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, just to get a better grounding in history of our country, as then you go and look for additional sources of information. There we go. So this particular textbook here, Expanding World, New Country, I'll start with that. It's the most recent one, published in 2019. And as it says, it was written for Year 13 or University Stage 1 history students. But if you're a teacher who's not teaching any of those levels and you want to get up to speed a little bit on particularly the 19th century and earlier, this is quite good. It is very accessible because, of course, being a textbook, that's one thing you keep in mind when you write them is accessibility of it. As it says there, it covers most of the 19th century, but the first two chapters do look earlier, as you'll see. Prior to this, I remember when I first started teaching, this is the text I used. It's actually, I think, a reissue of this text. But that's, what, nearly 30 years old? Well, 25 years old now. So, I mean, it certainly helped me out, as did these ones. There was actually a trilogy of self-published write-on workbooks by Diane Northcott and Cheryl Offner, one of which is covered here. But that was it, really. There was not a lot else out there that other than what you had to go looking for yourself. So as Nick mentioned, I've been quite passionate about the need to teach our own history, and I kind of, I suppose, in a way, ended up having to put my money where my mouth is and go and write a textbook that would be using a lot of the more recent publications and historiography. And so I'm not quite sure why that, oh, there we go. What you can see here is my bibliography. The reason why I show this, and this is something you should actually look at yourself with any textbook you're thinking about buying, or indeed any book, is what other historians or sources have been used to create the source. So the ones in the red are those that, they either are Māori historians or they're highly respected by Māori. And then, of course, there's a lot of other texts there that aren't specifically on Māori focus, with a Māori focus. And this is actually the other thing I'm ever grateful to a colleague of mine who said you should do this, ask people, historians, to critique the text before publishing. So it's part of the review process. Associate Professor Peter Adds, he's a member of Te Pauhiri Kōrero, the Māori History Teachers, Māori Historians Association. So too Professor Ethel Anderson, he's the expert on migration and navigation in the early period of the ancestors of Māori coming out to New Zealand. And jumping to Stan Conrad, who's actually a colleague of mine at Northcote College. He captained the Te Orere, so that was absolutely wonderful having him in my school, and I could show him my work, and he gave me some guidance on changes that I need to make. Professor Tom Brooking, he's pretty good on the migration of the English settlers in particular, or the UK settlers to New Zealand. Associate Professor Carolyn Daly, she's gender as one of her strong areas. So, that was useful to get her to have a look at my chapter that included that. Of course, Professor Dame Claudia Orange, the preeminent treaty historian, Dr. Vincent O'Malley, the preeminent New Zealand Wars historian, and Professor Dame Anne Salmon, who has a encyclopedic knowledge of Te Ao Māori. And I do really thank them for giving up their time to critique my text and give me feedback on it. So I'm quite confident that this is a quality piece of research that's going out as a textbook, and I think hopefully that would make you feel the same too. Okay, so there's the contents page. Just not going to spend huge amounts of time going through it, but you can sort of see how it's looking at that early period. In fact, these first two chapters are before the 19th century. And then we go through the arrival of Europeans, the treaty, and then what happens in chapter 5 after the treaty. And one of the other chapter, which I think there was a real lack in textbooks in New Zealand anyway, was looking at the situation for the migrants from the UK in their home country. And it wasn't good. And I think we need to understand that, what they were escaping from, and the promises that we use to draw them out to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then we can understand a little bit about how our history unrolled after 1840. The book also has a timeline, so that's always, I think, quite useful to if you're going, wow, when did that happen again? And you can pop back to the timeline, pages 6 to 9, to have a look. And here's just a sample page for those who haven't seen it. This is from the the voyaging of the ancestors of the Māori to New Zealand. So just a couple of things I want to point out to you. Often throughout the text, I'll add in the quotes from historians, what they've said. I think this is quite important because I use their words rather than my summary of what they said, and that's usually often quite a good indication of a text that you can go and check again if you wish to, if you're concerned about anything, and go and check out these historians. Little snippets. The Mariana Trench is the deepest in the world, so they're sort of scattered throughout. Plenty of relevant maps and tables. I always find myself these visuals really help understand the key points that are being made in the text. And they're also diagrams that help communicate the key ideas. So that diagram on the left is one I created and used in my classroom. And it really shows the key, as it says, the key developments in race relations, 1840, 1900. And not many, I wonder how many people miss this, but you can see those arrows that are sort of running across the page. Where they're dark is where something like the workable accord, that's that sort of positive relationship between Māori and settlers, is really strong. And as it fades out, so too does the workable accord, and that's beginning to sow the seed for conflict. So we've kind of, you can track that through where things change across that diagram. Here, summary of key points. If you're anything like me, often I'll read a few pages or something like that, and I'll be going, what's going on? I can't remember what the main points were. Well, happily, there they are, every 3 or 4 pages, some bullet points there just to capture the main points. Past and present. So, I do this particular part of the textbook here was looking at the alienation of Ngāi Tahu land in particular, shown on the map. And then it fast forwards to more recent times to look at the Ngāi Tahu Treaty settlement and how that's impacted. And there we go. Just another little snippet. This one quite important. Vincent Malley saying that most historians would agree that the passing of the 1852 Constitution Act was the real turning point in our history. I'll just quickly quickly show you where that is. Don't know if you can see this actually. It's like, let me just, if you can, I'll circle it. There it is. In 1852. It's not a very good circling. But there we go. So that's what Vincent O'Malley believes. Many historians would agree that was a turning point. So you know, there's some good, I think, myth busting in this, and one of those is on the Moriori. So if you're kind of ever wondering about, you know, what's the story there, this is a good sort of overview of and busting of those myths about the Moriori being some kind of people that were there before Māori arrived. This idea of whakapapa as a historical source, you know, there's some fairly, some people have views that it's not reliable, well, but here Athol Anderson explains why it is actually quite reliable, and there's good reasons for it. I'm not going to spend time looking at it here. You can come back and have a look later if you like, or get the book. And of course, like all historical sources, you use it with other sources to help create your histories. Again, Athol Anderson commenting on oral sources more generally, where some have been quite critical. He points out how they can be very useful, and I think that's something we need to remember. This chapter here, chapter 6, is once, as I mentioned earlier, if we really want to understand the process of colonization here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have to understand what life was like for those settlers who came here. What life was like there, what their expectations were, what it was that enticed them out. And there was a lot of competition for settlers: Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, and so New Zealand had to have something to offer these people. And really, Ballach talks about powerful myths and prophecies. In other words, you know, it was essentially migration propaganda which attracted them out here. Again, just showing you the types of resources as well as text within the book, and some more myth busting. This idea that we are a rural society. Well, in fact, just before World War I, there were more people living in urban centres than there were in rural areas. And as Ben Schrader, the historian, points out, you know, this happened remarkably quickly here in New Zealand. Okay, so this is now having gone to have a quick look at Big World, Small Country. This one is written for Year 11 history students. Could be accessible. I know some schools have bought it for their Year 10 social studies program. And again, because it's written for that year 11, you know, the language is kept accessible. And I think if you're a teacher, again, wanting to know more about New Zealand in the 20th century, this is not just about New Zealand in the 20th century, this book, but you can get a good overview from here. And there's the bibliography and the chapters. So the ones in red, or red boxes and underlined, where there's a significant focus on Aotearoa, New Zealand. And even in others, there is often a connection to New Zealand. Here's just one example. On the rise of Nazi Germany, New Zealander Geoffrey Cox, in the box at the bottom, happened to be in Italy and other places, and was able to report on what he was experiencing with, here's Mussolini, but other quotes are from Hitler's rise to power. Bill Lamison, he and other New Zealanders narrowly escaped execution in Buchenwald because they were pilots who dropped bombs, and they were not liked because of that. But they managed to get out of that narrow scrape. Again, like Expanding World, New Country, there's a timeline, so you can sort of locate the main events. I'm not sure what happened to the images there, but in the book it does have images. And again, diagrams. So the one on the top right, just an overview of Māori Pākehā race relations in the 20th century, and that'll make more sense as you read the text. Top left, scattered throughout, profiles of significant people. Wiramu Ratana. And I think the really important thing too to remember about what history's purpose is, it is not to be jingoistic or to look at heroes or whatever. That's not the purpose of history. And here, for example, in World War One, some New Zealanders, soldiers in Palestine, killed some people, 20 to 30 in total, in a nearby village, Arab people. And General Allenby, as it says there, I was proud of you as brave soldiers, but now I'm ashamed of you as cold-blooded murderers. So we have to be honest about our shortcomings as much as we can look at things that perhaps do instill a bit more pride. So moving on now to the skills workbook. So this is for level 1 NCEA. Again, very accessible. So if you're a teacher of the Aotearoa-New Zealand Histories curriculum at at any level, I suppose, the skills in here would be quite useful for you to come up to up to speed on for the do part of the histories curriculum, and of course for NCEA. There's the contents page, and you can sort of see it's broken up into inquiry skills and sources. So that's how to critically analyze sources, and then essay writing skills, and happily down there the answers to the activities. This is just one example of a page. Criteria for assessing reliability of secondary sources. Now, this is just a guide. It's not something you have to apply religiously or anything, but it gives you some sort of things to be thinking about, and therefore your ARCON has something to think about as they're analysing sources. And some more means by which primary sources can be investigated with the 5W1H questions. And there's some guided examples of those too that show how that works. This is the one for years 12 and 13. I think it is there. Yes, it does. And the first section there is just some skills with literacy, sort of higher level literacy. Critical thinking skills, which are important for NCA in particular. And then section 3, something which hasn't come up a lot, but is still important, I think, is analysing statistics, graphs, and maps, and essentially how people lie to us through graphs. So you will see the third bullet point under number 11, graphs, watching out for traps. And there's a whole bunch of trickery there that goes on, particularly unscrupulous politicians. It's important that we really do understand some of those means by which we're duped. Here's the level 1 matrix, assessment matrix. This possibly will change, but I think there's a very limited chance that the key sort of standards themselves will change. Maybe there'll be some tweaking of the wording. And there's the skills workbooks and the textbooks, which are probably useful to help with those achievement standards. Okay, this is steaming through this now. This is looking at a little more closely at the Aotearoa-New Zealand Histories curriculum, and hopefully you're getting familiar with the structure. So there is there, understand, know, and do. So we have in the histories curriculum 4 big ideas. There they are. We have our national contexts, the 4 national contexts, and of course we have our rohi, local area context as well. And finally, the do skills. And all of that combines to become the learning that cannot be left to chance. So you'll notice it's deliberately shown as a weave. So it's not like do the understand, then some other point do the know, and then at some other point do the do. They should all be weaved into. Years 9 to 10. There we go. Get those, whakapapa me te whanungatanga. And other, the kawanatanga me te rangateratanga. Te rangawaiwai me te kaitiakitanga. Oh yes, sorry, that one. Yeah, look, this is one of my regrets actually, that I was really thinking about Big World, Small Country, that I wanted to put a chapter on environmental history for New Zealand, but I think by the time I got to it, I was running out of steam. So it is a regret that there isn't. So that I don't think is covered in my books really at all. And there we go for our last one, economic activity. Okay, look, I'm very nearly finished, so you'll be pleased to know that this won't go on for too long. But the big ideas, and I think this is really important here for the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum. It is really important that these big ideas don't get lost or become an afterthought. In fact, I'm telling more and more teachers that actually this is what you need to start with when you're doing your planning, and making sure that whatever your topics you're choosing or context you're choosing to teach, that you can see in them at least 2, maybe 3, wonderful if you can do all 4 of these big ideas covered in your topics. So there are some other content areas in my textbooks that relate to these. So there we go. For example, the role of unionism, to do with power, international relationships, and other such things with post-World War II consumerism. I think that's really, really interesting, and young people kind of like this. Youth culture, music, and moral panics. That all does fit under Big Idea 4. So there's an opportunity to explore that, even if it's not specifically mentioned in the key learning in the main body of the curriculum document. And I think that is it. So now I just need to get this back and stop sharing.